You know that feeling you get when something in your relationship shifts, but you can't explain why? That quiet, almost invisible tension in your chest that whispers, something's off, and nobody's telling me the truth. If you feel that right now, don't click away. Stay with me. Because the next few minutes might save you from a heartbreak you never saw coming, and I need you here until the very end, because the final insight I'll reveal is the one most men never recover from when they ignore it. And before we begin, if you're serious about understanding women, relationships, and your own emotional power, make sure you subscribe and like this video so you never miss anything that could protect your heart. Let me speak to you as a psychologist and as someone who has spent years listening to private confessions behind closed doors, stories from women who crossed lines they later regretted, and stories from men who noticed the signs but didn't understand what they meant. What I'm about to reveal isn't about blame. It's about patterns. Patterns that show up when someone, anyone, starts drifting emotionally, hiding truths, and creating space for a different connection outside the relationship. And the first lie is one of silence. Not the kind where someone refuses to talk. The opposite. It's the lie hidden inside, "I'm just tired." You hear it after she suddenly becomes distant, distracted, or emotionally unavailable. Most men take that answer at face value. They assume it's stress, work, hormones, bad sleep, anything. But what you don't recognize is the emotional withdrawal behind those three words. When someone is preparing to disconnect from a relationship, they don't start by telling the truth. They start by reducing access to their feelings. They create a fog. They say tired because it's safe, vague, and unchallenged. And the danger? You start adjusting your expectations downward. You stop asking questions. You stop reaching out. You start accepting emotional scraps without realizing it. Then comes the second lie, wrapped in reassurance. "I just need some space." Now listen carefully. Asking for space isn't unhealthy. People need independence. But when space suddenly becomes a shield against accountability, clarity, or intimacy, something else is happening underneath. Space becomes distance. Distance becomes secrecy. Secrecy becomes opportunity. And opportunities become temptation. Not because you're not enough, but because emotional hunger always looks for the nearest source of comfort. And if she's not seeking that comfort from you, she'll find it somewhere. Attention, validation, conversation, escapism. Humans drift toward whatever feels easier than facing uncomfortable truths. The third lie is the most subtle and the most misunderstood. It's nothing. This is what people say when it is absolutely something. When there's unexplained mood swings, hidden conflicts, suppressed resentment, or an emotional bond forming somewhere else that they don't want questioned. Men often hear, "it's nothing," and let it go because they don't want to seem controlling or insecure. But what you're really doing is stepping away from the door of communication right when it needed to be opened. When someone uses nothing to avoid emotional transparency, they're protecting a truth they're not ready to admit. Not to you, and sometimes not even to themselves. And the last lie, the one that cuts the deepest, the one most men overlook until it's too late, I'll reveal in the final section because it is the one that flips the entire dynamic upside down, and it's the real reason many men never see the betrayal coming.
There's a moment in every man's life when he looks at the woman he loves and feels something he can't quite name. An unfamiliar distance behind her eyes, a shift in her energy, something that used to feel warm now feels careful. And this is where most men make their biggest mistake. They try to rationalize what they feel instead of listening to it. They tell themselves, "she's stressed, she's busy, she's just overwhelmed." But emotional instincts exist for a reason. And what you're feeling in that moment is the subtle weight of another lie forming. A lie meant to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, or to cover a growing emotional drift. It usually sounds like this: "he's just a friend." Now, pause, breathe, don't jump to conclusions. In healthy relationships, people absolutely can have friends of the opposite sex. But the issue is not the friend. The issue is the timing, the secrecy, the energy shift, and the sudden sense that you've been pushed out of a part of her world you used to be invited into. When emotional bonds shift, they shift slowly and quietly at first. She starts laughing a little differently when a certain name comes up. She checks her phone with more urgency. She becomes protective of her screen. And yet, when you ask, even casually, you'll hear that same line. He's just a friend. It's not always a lie of betrayal. Sometimes it's a lie of avoidance. A lie meant to keep you from asking questions she isn't prepared to answer. Because once she labels him as just a friend, the conversation ends. There's nothing left for you to challenge without feeling like you're overstepping, insecure, or paranoid. It's a psychological shield, one that puts you in a weakened position without you even realizing it. What most men don't understand is this. It's not the external connection that poses the real danger. It's the internal emotional shift happening behind the scenes. Emotional cheating starts long before anything physical happens. It starts with comparison. She compares how easily this other person listens, how they make her feel seen, how they don't argue with her the way you do. She starts feeding that connection tiny pieces of her emotional world, pieces that used to belong to you, not because you failed, not because the relationship is broken, but because unaddressed emotions always look for the path of least resistance. And this is where her excuses start to sound softer, lighter, more dismissive. You're overthinking it. It's nothing. You're making it weird. These aren't meant to hurt you. They're meant to protect her from facing the discomfort she doesn't want to deal with. Because admitting that she's developing a connection elsewhere would require her to confront truths she's not ready to confront, not about the relationship, but about herself. Here's the painful reality. When someone starts hiding emotional energy behind the word friend, they're not protecting the friendship, they're protecting the escape. And the deeper truth is this. Emotional drift doesn't happen suddenly. It happens because conversations that should have happened were avoided. Needs that should have been expressed were suppressed, and boundaries that should have been respected became blurred. There's a particular kind of lie people tell, not out of cruelty but out of fear. A fear of confrontation, a fear of being judged, a fear of admitting something they don't fully understand themselves. And this lie is one of the clearest psychological markers that someone's heart is drifting, even if they haven't done anything wrong yet. It's the lie wrapped inside the phrase, "I just haven't been feeling myself lately." Now on the surface, that sounds honest, vulnerable even, but you have to listen to what's missing. When someone says they're not themselves but refuses to talk about why, what they're really doing is hiding the emotional source of their discomfort. Maybe they're confused about their feelings. Maybe they're battling guilt. Maybe they've started comparing the relationship they're in with the emotional comfort someone else is offering. But the key is this. They're trying to create emotional distance without admitting the real cause of it. Most men hear this lie and respond with sympathy. It's okay, take your time. Let me know if you want to talk. You give her space, thinking it's the compassionate thing to do. But space without communication is not compassion. It's disconnection, and in that disconnection, emotional drift accelerates. She begins sharing more about her inner world with someone who feels easier, someone who doesn't challenge her, someone who doesn't hold a mirror to her accountability. That emotional vulnerability, once shared with you, is now being shared somewhere else. But here's the psychological twist. People don't disconnect from their partner because they've found someone better. They disconnect because they've disconnected from themselves, and someone outside the relationship becomes the temporary cure for that discomfort. It's not romance, it's escape, and like all escapes, it begins in silence. Watch the changes, not the dramatic ones, those come later. Watch the subtle ones. When she used to tell you about her day, now she summarizes it with, "It was fine." When she used to open up when she was stressed, now she says, "It doesn't matter." When she used to turn to you for reassurance, now she turns inward, or worse, outward. These small shifts matter because emotional intimacy is built on consistency. When the consistency fades, the bond cracks. And when the bond cracks, people start seeking validation in places that make them feel alive again, appreciated again, recognized again. Not always attraction, sometimes just relief. But relief is powerful. It can pull someone away from the person they love without them even seeing the danger. And this is the part most men don't realize. Emotional distance rarely begins with dissatisfaction toward you. It often begins with dissatisfaction within themselves. But instead of facing that discomfort, they hide it behind soft, vague lies that keep you at a distance while they figure out their feelings in private. The problem? Feelings explored in private often become feelings acted on in private. When someone says, "I'm not myself," but refuses clarity, they're not only hiding something, they're avoiding the conversation that would bring them back to you. Silence grows roots, distance becomes a habit, and habits become the doorway through which emotional infidelity walks in effortlessly. There is a moment, quiet, subtle, almost invisible, where the entire direction of a relationship shifts. It's the moment when small lies turn into emotional armor, when honesty becomes selective, and when the connection that once felt natural now feels rehearsed. And this shift is almost always accompanied by the fourth lie, one of the most misleading and emotionally dangerous phrases a partner can say: "You're imagining things." Most men hear this and immediately doubt themselves. They start questioning their intuition. They convince themselves they're overreacting. They apologize for feelings that were perfectly valid. But what you don't realize in that moment is that you're witnessing one of the most common psychological defense mechanisms people use when they feel guilty, confused, or emotionally exposed: deflection. When someone begins to emotionally detach, they become hyper-aware of how their actions look from the outside. They know they're hiding messages, deleting conversations, withdrawing affection, or giving their emotional energy to someone else. Even if it hasn't crossed any lines yet, they feel the shift. They feel the guilt pressing on them. And when you notice the signs, when you bring up the change in her tone, her distance, her sudden protectiveness over her phone, she's confronted with a truth she doesn't want to face. So instead of addressing the behavior, she reframes your perception. Your imagining it isn't a correction. It's a way to make you question your reality so she doesn't have to confront hers. And most men fall for it, not because they're weak, but because they're loyal, because they want to believe the woman they care about, because the truth is more painful than the uncertainty. But here's the part that stings the most. This lie doesn't just protect her, it slowly dismantles your self-trust. And once you stop trusting your instincts, she no longer has to hide anything, because you've learned to silence yourself. That's the psychological danger. Not the lie itself, but the fact that the lie reshapes your confidence, your clarity, and your ability to recognize emotional distance for what it truly is. At this stage, the problem is rarely about cheating. It's about emotional honesty. When someone avoids accountability, everything becomes blurry. Conversations feel shallow. Arguments end without resolution. She becomes more sensitive to being questioned, more reactive, more withdrawn, and you start shrinking yourself to keep the peace, not realizing the peace is already gone. But here's the uncomfortable truth. People don't lie like this because they're bad. They lie because they're scared of confrontation, scared of admitting they're confused, scared of hurting you, scared of being seen as the villain in a story they didn't intend to write. And that fear makes them shift responsibility away from themselves and onto you. Your imagining things is not a rejection of your intuition. It's a confession of her discomfort, a signal that something inside her is unresolved, a sign that conversations are being avoided, not because you're wrong, but because the truth is complicated. And if you've reached this stage, you're already standing at the edge of the turning point most men miss, the point where lies become emotional distance, and emotional distance becomes a doorway. There's a certain heaviness that settles into a man's chest when he knows the truth but has no proof, when he feels the distance but can't name it, when he senses the shift but can't confront it. You start living between two emotional worlds, one where you hope you're wrong, and one where your instincts are whispering that you're absolutely right. And in that confusion, something dangerous happens. You begin accepting explanations that don't align with reality. This is where the next lie appears. A lie spoken softly, almost kindly. A lie intended to soothe your suspicion, not solve it. "I just need time to figure things out. Now listen carefully." This phrase isn't inherently bad. Everyone has moments where they feel overwhelmed or unsure about life, goals, or identity. But when someone uses this line specifically after you've confronted them about emotional distance, secrecy, or changed behavior, they're not buying time to fix the relationship. They're buying time to avoid choosing. It's a psychological pause button, but the only person being paused is you. Most men hear this and freeze. They think giving space will heal things. They think patience will bring clarity. But what often happens instead is this. While you're waiting, she's deciding. While you're holding on, she's drifting. While you're imagining a future, she's reevaluating the past. Time to figure things out becomes a soft barrier between you and the part of her world she no longer wants you inside of. And the more you wait silently, the more emotionally distant she becomes, because she's already begun imagining life outside the relationship, or she's already giving emotional intimacy to someone else who feels easier, lighter, less complicated. But here's the psychological twist most men never see. When someone is truly invested in a relationship, confusion doesn't create distance. It creates conversation. People who want to stay don't disappear to figure things out. They lean in, they talk, they work through the discomfort. Avoidance isn't a sign of confusion, it's a sign of decision. There's another layer you need to understand. When someone asks for time without giving clarity, what they're really doing is protecting themselves from guilt. They don't want to hurt you by ending things. They don't want to confront the consequences of drifting emotionally. They don't want to admit that their attention, energy, or validation has been going somewhere else. So instead of choosing a direction, they leave you suspended, emotionally on hold. And this is the most dangerous emotional position a man can be in, waiting for someone who has already stepped back, hoping for answers that will never come, trying to interpret silence as progress when it's actually distance. You start doubting your worth. You start bargaining with yourself. You start thinking, if I'm patient, if I change, if I wait long enough, she'll come back. But time doesn't heal emotional drift. Communication does. Honesty does. Mutual effort does. When someone asks for time but refuses transparency, it's not a request, it's a warning. A sign that the emotional connection is slipping into a space where you no longer have influence. And the most painful part, most men don't realize that the person who asks for time often already knows what they're choosing. There's one lie, one final lie, that cuts deeper than all the others. Not because it's cruel, not because it's loud, but because it sounds so gentle, so reasonable, so harmless, that most men never recognize it for what it is. I've seen men ignore every red flag, every moment of distance, every shift in tone, because this last lie felt like comfort. It's the lie wrapped inside the phrase, "I would never hurt you." People don't say this when everything is healthy. They say it when something inside them has already shifted. They say it when they're trying to calm your intuition. They say it when they want to preserve the image of who they believe they are, instead of admitting the reality of what they're doing. And most men, especially good men, believe it because you want to believe in her goodness, her loyalty, her intentions. You want to trust the relationship more than you trust the uncomfortable truth rising inside you. But here's the harsh psychological reality. People rarely hurt others because they're evil. They hurt others because they're afraid, because they're ashamed, because they don't have the emotional courage to confront their own unhappiness. And when guilt mixes with fear, they use reassurances instead of honesty. "I would never hurt you" isn't a promise. It's a preparation, a way to shield themselves from the guilt of what they're already contemplating, a way to convince you and themselves that they're still the person they want to believe they are, a way to avoid accountability while quietly distancing their heart. And here's what most men never understand until it's too late. When someone has to say, "I would never hurt you," it's usually because something in their behavior already has. Maybe they've been hiding conversations. Maybe they've been emotionally confiding in someone else. Maybe they've been withdrawing affection, intimacy, or effort. Maybe they've been drifting away quietly, hoping you won't notice, so they don't have to face the fallout of the truth. People who are truly all in don't need to promise they won't hurt you. Their consistency is the proof. Their transparency is the proof. Their behavior is the proof. Words are not proof. And the emotional trap is this. The more you believe the reassurance, the more blind you become to the reality. You start excusing the distance. You start absorbing the responsibility. You start telling yourself, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe the problem is me. But it's not you. It's the silence, the avoidance, the lack of clarity, the shift in intimacy, the emotional drift that no reassurance can hide forever. Now listen closely, because this is the part that matters more than anything I've said so far. The real danger isn't that someone might lie before they cheat. The real danger is that you stop trusting yourself in the process. You lose your confidence. You lose your boundaries. You lose your emotional intelligence. You lose the ability to see relationships clearly. And once a man loses trust in his own instincts, every future relationship becomes harder, more painful, more confusing. So here's the truth you were never supposed to hear. Your intuition is not insecurity. Your discomfort is not paranoia. Your questions are not disrespect. Your boundaries are not too much. A healthy partner welcomes clarity, not confusion. A healthy connection thrives in transparency, not secrecy. A healthy relationship strengthens your instincts, not silences them. You don't need to fear being too much. You need to fear accepting too little. If this message hit you deeply, if it woke something inside you, then don't leave without subscribing and liking the video. Because the knowledge you gain here will protect you, strengthen you, and reshape the way you understand relationships forever.